Today, I want to talk about Russia and whether its war against Ukraine is a just war or not. Now, before I talk about that particularly, I will give some background on the issue. Let me begin. So, to understand this situation, I think it's primary to understand that this comes from an internal conflict within Ukraine between the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republics and the Ukrainian government. In here on in, I'll refer to the Donetsk People's Republic as the DPR and the Luhansk People's Republic as the LPR. These two republics are self-proclaimed breakaway states located in Ukraine. DPR was formed on 7th April 2014 and LPR was formed around the same time in 2014. Ukraine regards both the DPR and the LPR as terrorist organizations. However, they view themselves as rightful republics, and recently, on February 21st, Russia recognized them as official republics. And the countries, there are other countries that recognize them, such as Syria, and Nicaragua, Belarus, and Venezuela have expressed their support to the Russian recognition of the DPR's independence. South Ossetia, which is also a state with limited recognition, mostly internationally recognized as part of Georgia, has recognized the DPR as a sovereign entity after it declared independence from Ukraine in 2014, with Donetsk as its declared republic, as its declared capital, sorry. And these same countries have given similar recognition and support to Russia's recognition of the LPR. Now, why did these regions break away from Ukraine? Well, to know that, we have to look at the history. The LPR and DPRs are located in the historical Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. Since Ukraine's independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, eastern and western Ukraine typically voted for different candidates in presidential elections. Viktor Yanukovych, a Donetsk native, was elected president of Ukraine in 2010. Eastern Ukrainian dissatisfaction with the government was also attributed to the Euromaidan protests. So what happened was that uh, Yanukovych was, uh, although he was legally elected, and there was no proof that the election was fraudulent, the Western countries such as the EU and the US and NATO did not recognize his election and covertly sponsored a revolution against him in 2014, which led to his overthrow. Then uh, these led to protests in the eastern Ukraine, which gradually escalated into an armed conflict between the newly formed Ukrainian government and the local armed militias. The pro Russian unrest in Ukraine was originally characterized by riots and protests, which had eventually escalated into the storming of government offices. Um, Around this time, Crimea had had a referendum where they voted to join Russia as a state of Russia, and the DPR and LPR both wanted to have a similar style referendum, but Ukraine would not allow it, and so uh, they took action in again in that same year 2014. 200 to 1,000 separatists stormed and took control of the first two floors of the government headquarters of the regional state administration. breaking down doors and smashing windows. The separatists demanded a referendum to join Russia and said they would otherwise take unilateral control and dismiss the elected government. When the session was not held, the unelected separatists held a vote within the RSA building and overwhelmingly backed the declaration of the Donetsk People Republic. According to the Russian media an agency called TASS, the declaration was voted by some regional legislators, but Ukrainian media claimed that neither the Donetsk City Council nor district councils of the city delegated any representatives to the session. So I can't say how legitimate this vote was. But through later votes and referendums, it was affirmed that the people within this region and in the LPR wanted to separate from Ukraine. And here, and the people had different opinions regarding this situation. Polling during the period of the referendum indicated that around 18% of Donetsk Oblast residents supported the seizures of administrative buildings, while 72% disapproved. This shows that majority of people were against violence and wanted it to be peaceful. However, 12% only were in favor of Ukraine and Russia uniting into a single state. A quarter were in favor of regional secession to join Russia. 38.4% supported federalization. 41.1% supported a unitary Ukraine with decentralized power. And 10.6% supported the status quo. This means that only a few wanted to uh, stay as part of Ukraine as it is. Majority of them wanted just Ukraine to give them more power, but a large number, a quarter, wanted to join Russia. And in August, this poll was taken around May, and in August 2015, another poll was held where 6,500 respondents from 19 cities of Donetsk Oblast, 29% supported DPR, and 10% considered themselves to be Russian patriots. This is significant because it shows that very quickly people started associating themselves with the country of Russia. The reason for this is because these people are ethnically Russian and also speak Russian. And there has been evidence of attacks by the Ukrainian government against them. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, recently said that attacks have been going on again in these regions against civilians and places like schools and hospitals. And there is evidence to support that from if you look beyond the Western media has not reported this at all. So what this shows is that to some extent Russia is right in recognizing these regions as sovereign republics because they have a constitution, they have elections, a currency, postal services, military, and law enforcement. So they do have some of the features that a country has, or a state at least has. So there is some justification for recognizing them as individual states. But the fact remains that they are still, according to international law, part of Ukraine. Now, that is why Ukraine still does not recognize them as republics, and neither does the EU or NATO also does not recognize them as such. Now, this is kind of similar to another war that happened in the 1990s. It is called the Kosovo War. The Kosovo War was an armed conflict in Kosovo that started 28 February 1998 and lasted until 11th June 1999. It was fought by the forces of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, Serbia, and Montenegro, which controlled Kosovo before the war, and the Kosovo Albanian rebel group known as the Kosovo Liberation Army. The conflict ended when the North Atlantic when NATO intervened by beginning airstrikes in March 1999, which resulted in Yugoslav forces withdrawing from Kosovo. The KLA was formed in the early 1990s to fight against Serbian persecution of Kosovo Albanians, initiated its first campaign in 1995, yada yada. This is a similar situation because it's again a situation where a group within a country are being persecuted and attacked by the government, and a foreign entity comes to their aid, which is what Russia is doing. Now, this bombing campaign by NATO was also like uh, Russia's current invasion of Ukraine, was not given approval by the UNSC. And so there is some similarity between this. But I think that this was justified. And uh, in hindsight, most analysts agree that this war between NATO and the Yugoslavia Federal Republic was justified because it was done to protect a group of people. And later, Kosovo was recognized as a individual country. Now, to understand whether what Russia is doing is a just war or not, we have to go back and find what the meaning of just war is. And here, just war is a notion that the resort to armed force, in Latin called jus ad bellum, is justified under certain conditions. Also, the notion that the use of such force, jus in bello, should be limited in certain ways. Just war is a Western concept, and yeah, it is rooted in classical Roman and biblical Hebraic culture and contain both religious and secular elements. Most scholars agree that to be considered just, a war must meet several jus ad bellum requirements. The four most important conditions are: 1. The war must be declared openly by a proper sovereign authority. 2. The war must have a just cause. 3. The warring state must have just intentions. And 4. The aim of the war must be the establishment of a just peace. Since the end of World War II, it has become customary to add three other conditions. There must be a reasonable chance of success, force must be used as a last resort, and the expected benefits of war must outweigh its anticipated costs. So these are the seven uh, conditions under which a war can be said to be just. This is according to the modern theory of just war. However, it's interesting to note that other cultures like India also have this concept. The Indian Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, offers the first written discussions of a just war in Sanskrit called Dharma Yuddha or righteous war. In it, one of the five ruling brothers, the Pandavas, asked if the suffering caused by war can ever be justified. A long discussion then ensues between the siblings, establishing criteria like proportionality. Chariots cannot attack cavalry, only other chariots, no attacking people in distress. Just means no poisoned or barbed arrows. Just cause, no attacking out of rage. And fair treatment of captives and the wounded. So, is Russia's war with Ukraine, does Russia's actions satisfy both the modern concept of just war and the Western concept and the Indian concept? I'll look at the Indian concept first. Let's see if it justifies the first point, which is proportionality. It is proportional because they are using uh, not their full military power, but simply a more subdued version of it, because Ukraine is also not used, doesn't have a very strong army, so Russia is not going too aggressive against them, so it's proportional in that case. And they are not attacking people in distress. People who are trying to evacuate Ukraine now through the border of Poland and Lithuania are not being attacked by Russian airplanes or Russian soldiers. Now, just means so far there has been no uh, reports that chemical or biological weapons have been used, or torture or something else has been done. So that's also not a just means. Just cause. This is not something that is completely clear to me now, because it's obviously not being done out of rage, because Putin had given the West several options for peace during its diplomacy, but simply NATO would not accept it and kept trying to get Ukraine into NATO, uh, and encouraging the Ukrainian President Zelensky and his government to continue attacking the DPR and LPR. So it is a just cause, I think, to protect people who share a language and ethnicity and culture with Russia. Russia has some responsibility to them. Similarly to how India intervened and continues to intervene in the Sri Lankan civil conflict between the Sinhalese and the Tamil people of Sri Lanka. Although India did not wage war against Sri Lanka in that war, it did send peacekeepers. I think that might have been a better option for Russia, but now there's no point in talking about that. So, yeah, according to the Indian concept of just war, Russia's war with Ukraine is a just war. Now, let's look at the Western concept. The four most important conditions are that the war must be declared by a proper sovereign authority. And this case it has. It's been declared by the Russian government and the Russian president. And as a just cause, that's a similar condition in the Indian concept. uh, for example, the defense of the common good or a response to grave injustice. I think it's both, because it's to prevent Ukraine from becoming a part of NATO, which would threaten the people of Russia with, because NATO military weapons will be very close to Russia's borders and could threaten them. And there's also a response to grave injustice being meted out against Russian speaking uh, groups and people in the DPR and LPR. The warring state must have just intentions. It's not shouldn't be done for self-interest. This, I think, is not fully true. I think there are some self-interest, but it's also being done for justice. Like I've said, Russia did seek diplomacy repeatedly with the West and Ukraine, but they failed to honor the Minsk agreement. I have mentioned this in a previous video, and back to the topic. So yeah, this also I'd say that this is fulfilled, and for the war must be have this aim of just peace. I think that this I'm not completely sure. I do understand that Russia wants to change the government in Ukraine and force there to be a government that is pro-Russia and that won't attack the republics. But however, Now, while that would be peace, I'm not sure that's a just peace because that would make Ukraine or whatever is left of Ukraine, Western Ukraine at least, it would make them almost a puppet of the Russian government. So I don't think that should happen. I think what they should do is simply force Ukraine to recognize the independence of the DPR and the LPR. And yeah, they should allow Ukraine to continue as their government, and they shouldn't try to intervene and decide who becomes the president of Ukraine. That should be the decision of the Ukrainian people. So, yeah, that point I don't agree with is not fulfilled. There are other conditions that were later added, like I said, reasonable chance of success. Yeah, this has a reasonable chance of success. Totally, Russia's military is much stronger than Ukraine's, so I agree with this. They should be very successful and will probably win the war in a week. Force must be used as a last resort. I agree. Force was used only after about 7 years from when the Minsk agreement was signed, and it was not being followed by the other parties, the Ukrainian government. So it is a last resort. The expected benefits of war must outweigh the anticipated costs. Yes, I don't think that there are going to be heavy costs. I think it can still be, it will end soon and there won't be too much casualties because Russia is attacking mostly the military sites in Ukraine. They're not deliberately attacking and mass murdering civilians. And the benefits will be peace in Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia. So this means that out of these seven uh, conditions, Russia fulfills six. And out of these four conditions, Russia fulfills all four. Now, to see if any war crimes are being committed, we have to look at the United Nations, specifically uh, this statute, which contains a definition of war crimes and is used by the International Criminal Court. For the purpose of this statute, war crimes means grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions of 12th August 1949, namely any of the following acts against persons or property protected under the provisions of the relevant Geneva Convention. Willful killing. I wouldn't say there's willful killing. It's not like they're carpet bombing Ukraine. They're attacking soldiers, military personnel, but mainly they're attacking the infrastructure. They're avoiding attacking Ukrainian soldiers and civilians both. There has been no torture or inhuman treatment reported so far from either side. There's not willfully causing great suffering, extensive destruction. No hostages have been taken as far as I know, but I'm not sure about that. I've seen some reports, but I can't really confirm that either way. Russia has not compelled any Ukrainian prisoner of war to fight for them. They have not willfully deprived a prisoner of war or other protected persons of the rights of fair and regular trial. Unlawful deportation or transfer of unlawful confinement, that hasn't happened. So we can see that um, that Russia is waging a just war according to the conditions in both Indian philosophy and modern philosophy. And according to the United Nations, you haven't yet committed any war crimes. So I don't think that the hysteria that the Western media is whipping up about this is very justified. Certainly, it is tragedy. War is always tragic, and it is very unfortunate that Russia has had to do this, but Russia did not have any choice. War was a necessity. However, I am afraid that they are not moving beyond eastern Ukraine and are attacking western Ukraine. So far, not civilians, but they're still attacking western Ukraine, which I think, at least politically, I won't talk about militarily, but politically, I think that's not good. They should stick to protecting the DPR and LPR and making sure that they are safe from the Ukrainian government and the other regions of the Donbass. But I understand why they're attacking Kiev and want to take it over. I agree with that. It's, but I do hope that once they depose this president, they can, uh, or rather, like I was saying before, that they should not remove the president, but simply surround the capital city and force him to let the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic to secede from Ukraine. Force him to make that decision. And then Russia should leave Ukraine and DPR and LPR, unless those two regions want to become parts of Russia, which is will be a decision between the two of them. But Russia should leave Ukraine's government alone and should allow the whatever government to form in Ukraine according to their own laws and the wishes of the Ukrainian people. So that's what I wanted to say. If you want to see my other videos about nationalism in countries outside of South Asia, click here. If you want to see my other video that I made last week, please click here. If you want to see the sources for this video, click the links in the description below. Thank you for watching. Vande Mataram. And may there be peace between Ukraine and Russia and for all people all over the world.